Hello, everyone. It's Sue Tesloff with you here from Capstone Leadership Solutions. Welcome to today's live event where we're going to be overviewing the 5-point conversation. So what is that tool for in our leadership toolkit? Well, sometimes, and it's rare, right? Hopefully it's rare. In most organizations it's rare. Sometimes we have an employee that we are leading where their behavior or their performance is at that lowest end of variation. It's chronically and persistently not to standard, okay? So how do we get to this point? Let's just tee that up first. How do we get to the point where as a leader, we're in a situation where we need to do something, we need to correct this situation of maybe long-standing, chronic, persistent behavior performance that's at the lower end of variation and very negatively impactful, right? I mean, we wouldn't need or want to do anything about it if it wasn't causing any negative consequence, but the reality is it does. And often too, the reality is that usually it has to do with behavior. That it's behavior that's at the lowest end of variation. Chronic and persistent bad attitude behavior, even to the forms of bullying and the like. So, so why is it and how do we get there? Well, the start of how we kind of get there is that it's gone unaddressed. I mean, it wouldn't even meet the definition of chronic and persistent if it didn't go unaddressed, whether that was just no attempts at all to address it or really ineffective attempts have been made to address it that just didn't lead to a correction of the situation. So that can happen. That, you know, the reason we get to this situation as a leader of needing to have this tool and know what to do about it is it's gone unaddressed. And in a way, when it's gone unaddressed, is that it really has, in some sense, been accepted, right? And so what we accept is what we teach. And so there's been situations where I've been coaching a leader to prepare and have this conversation with an employee or a physician. I've had them myself where the person has been behaving or performing at this really low substandard level, below standard, for sometimes decades. Okay, so it's been unaddressed and allowed to continue for decades. So now here you are as a leader and you're in a situation and you're saying, I've got to do something about this, right? Well, you know, what's really interesting is that, how did you get into this situation to begin with? Well, there's a likelihood that maybe you were the person that allowed it for years and years and years, right? You were the manager of this person who's continued to allow it. And now you want to do something about it. You see and want to do something about it, but you just don't know what to do and you're ready, right? Maybe there's been a straw that broke the camel's back, you're ready. Or maybe for the most part, most often what I see is you inherited this, right? Maybe you come into a new department or a new organization as a leader and you inherited your team, right? And when you assess your team and start to understand their behavior, performance, you see this, right? You see chronic, persistent behavior performance, that definitely something has to be done about. One of the things that Jane and I like to say about that is, when we inherit, a situation like this, and again, we've coached people where they're a new leader, they've been promoted maybe from within and they were the peer to this person or they're new to the organization. And it's been allowed for years or maybe decades, and now they're the one taking, a stab at it. Sometimes that can be the trap where they say, no, I didn't cause this problem. I just inherited it, and I'm not going to be the one to do anything about it. You can't make me. But our kind of saying on that is, if you started a new position 6 months ago or more, and in that team that you inherited, if there's a person whose level of behavior performance is at that lowest negatively impactful level, then it's like you hired them yourself and that you've accepted and tolerated their behavior, and it's almost like you're part of that situation, right? So hopefully today we can give you some skill that no matter how you got into this situation, or maybe you're not even there yet, but you're getting ready in case you do encounter it. But if you're there, what do I do about it? So we're going to jump right into that. But first, I want to say one more thing about, why would we even want to do anything about it, right? Like, why as a leader do we have to do something about it? Well, when we look at organizations, especially the ones that we work with, who are really on a journey to become top-ranking, award-winning, organizations, this level of behavior performance can be what holds them back from those very top successful kind of results that, all the other people are working hard and doing what needs to be done to get the organization to the kind of results and the kind of culture and place that they want to be proud to work for and patients would choose. But this lowest level of behavior performance will cause those efforts that were going up and up and up to plateau and maybe sometimes slip back down. There'll be turnover, usually of the wrong people, your highest performing and behaving people. They don't want to work on a team with this, right? And so the person you're likely to lose in a situation when you don't address this is your top performers. So save them, right? Save all your employees by learning what to do about this, okay? So the real kind of mastery of this is two things. One is you need to muster the will, and two, you need to master the skill. So number one is muster the will. The reason that it likely has been unaddressed by you in the past or by others in the past is there was not this will, to have, the conversation or take the action that was necessary. And we call those traps, that there's like this whole list of traps we can fall into as leaders that kind of, talk us out of doing anything about it. So we call those traps, and we have a whole list of traps. We put that in our book, a whole list of traps that leaders can fall into. For the most part, sometimes in healthcare, the major trap we fall into is we're just nice people, right? So we come to healthcare often to positions in healthcare because we're nice people. We have big hearts. We care for people. That's why we're drawn to this profession. And so now we're in a situation where we need to act on something that, to confront something that's really difficult to confront, to have a conversation that's really difficult to have. And it might even seem unnice or cruel for us to say some words that we need to say to correct this situation, and we just don't have the will for it. It can be other traps like, well, I didn't see it myself. And that's a trap. It could be, I've tried this before and it didn't work, and there was retaliation and negative consequences, so I'm not doing that again. There's all sorts of traps. It could be just that it makes you sick to your stomach to think about having to do it. So kind of the advice we like to give about, mustering the will is something that we learned when Jane and I went to national speakers training, years ago when we first started our company. And, one of the things that they taught us about just, getting on a stage and talking to people, which I was extremely fearful for. I had no will to do that. When I used to even lead a meeting, I had, a few sweat rings, and I just, couldn't even say two words together just because I was, I didn't have the will to speak in front of people, so here I am. Now I'm on video here, believe it or not. And I stand on stages and I talk to people all the time. But, there was a point in my career where I didn't have the will or the skill to do that. And so this is really no different, is mustering the will and mastering the skill to have a conversation. And so the muster the will part, what we learned about that was three things, was really to do it more, be prepared, and find a mentor. That those are three good pieces of advice to be able to have the will to do something. Well, in this case, with these 5-point correction conversations, there's a high likelihood that you'll never do enough of them. God, I hope you never have to do enough of them, that there's, a large quantity of them to do over your career, or even at one time. So I'm hoping that there's not a situation like that. So, this is one of those things that we will rarely do, hopefully. And so really doing it more doesn't really apply here. But, being prepared and finding a mentor certainly is great advice for mustering the will. So, really, being prepared, that's the same true for speaking. You know, if you can be prepared, you're going to be more confident when you get up to speak because you're prepared. Same thing with this conversation. You have to be prepared. And so that mentor or maybe several mentors may help you with that. There's been many times where me, you know, as somebody from Capstone Leadership Solutions, maybe in one of our partner organizations, maybe we are, you know, one of the mentors that works with a leader and their HR department, and maybe even the leader's boss, a senior leader. Maybe, you know, there's 3 mentors helping this person prepare for this conversation because it's sometimes that difficult, right, to prepare. We like to call it the tango, 200 hours of practice for a 2-minute dance, because the conversation I'm going to share with you is really a short one. It's 5 points, and it really shouldn't last long. It really isn't a long conversation, not this first one, because this first conversation is a stimulus. It starts the initiation of change. It isn't the only conversation you're going to have with this employee, but you need to be prepared. And because it's a short conversation, because it's an important conversation, maybe one of the most important conversations that you're going to give and this employee is going to receive when you think about, you know, your career as a leader, it might be one of the most important for you and them. And so you want to be very, very prepared for this conversation. So really I want to talk about the preparation, the delivery, and also the follow-up to this conversation. And then I'm going to outline all 5 points. So that preparation piece, I mentioned, you know, making sure that you practice. And one of the things that you want to practice is, you know, once you've got the conversation outlined and you have your talking points all prepared and you're ready to go and you're practicing, what you need to practice is the reaction. If you know your people, you know, this is a great, you know, thing for leaders who know their people. If you know your people, you're going to probably know how they're going to react to this kind of conversation. But maybe you don't know this person well enough to know how they're going to react, or maybe they're going to surprise you with their reaction. So that's one of the things that we recommend. And Jane and I one time compiled a whole list of all the reactions that, you know, we were made aware of in the debriefing of leaders from these kind of conversations that we help them prep for. And I mean, it can be everything from something that's, you know, almost an act of violence. It can be tears. It can be, suicidal thoughts and in statements that they make. I mean, it can be all sorts of things, and you have to be prepared for all of it. And so, there were times when I was preparing to deliver one of these conversations, and, you know, I was very careful about where it was held. I was very careful about security and safety and things like that, right? So you have to be prepared for those kind of things. So that preparation is very important. Also, in some situations that I know of, we've had to even have, you know, beyond HR, even employment law involved. It may involve people that are on contracts, physicians that have contracts, or others that might have a specific employment contract where there's a notice to cure clause or something like that. So, you know, this isn't just something as a leader that you just jump into and wing on your own. There's a lot of preparation, and we're not attorneys and we're not legal advisors there, which is why we encourage you as well to engage those people in your organization when you get to a point of needing to have a conversation like this. So when you prepare this conversation and you go to deliver these 5 points in the 5-point conversation, when you deliver this first conversation and message, it's not really, you know, when we talk about conversation implies that there's a two-way, you know, that both people are talking. And so the delivery of this conversation is one way. It is a delivery. It is a message delivery. It is not a dialogue. Okay, so there will be follow-up conversations to this, because one conversation is not going to change 20 years of bullying behavior, or, you know, something to that level, right? So one conversation isn't going to do that, but this is the starter conversation, and the delivery of this is very intentionally set up with these 5 points and with this delivery of, you know, you talking as the leader and them listening. And so in that situation, it's good to open up the 5-point conversation with that clear kind of message that you are going to do the talking and you need them to listen. And then in the preparation, you're going to prepare these 5 points into a document in writing that you can give to them when they leave the conversation, because you want them to reference it, not just what they heard over and over in their head, but also see it in writing in case they tune out on you, or they stop listening to you, or they got angry or emotional and they couldn't keep listening to you. So prepare it also in writing in advance in a document. And usually Human Resources has a document like that, that's some sort of formal corrective action or performance improvement plan of sorts. So you want it in writing too. So this is really about a delivery, okay? And you want to set it up that it's all serious. You talk, they listen, and you keep complete control of the conversation, just complete control of the conversation. And if they want to ask questions, if they want to, kind of justify or blame or question or anything like that, you need to just quickly and set it up right from the beginning. If you have questions, if you want to reject what I'm saying, if you want to speak up against it, if you want what? Anything you want to say, I want you to hold it for the next conversation. So every time they go to speak up, you need to just say, I need to complete the 5 points. I have 5 points I need to share with you today, and I need you to sit and listen. And any questions you have, any follow-up comments, anything you want to say to me, that's the next conversation. And that meeting will be set up and I'll listen to you, okay, in response to this. But today I need you to listen to this. Also, what's in this conversation is nothing positive. Now that's really hard, especially when we're nice people. There is nothing positive in this conversation. And, these are not people that are just, imperfect in every way. Usually it's one, very, specific thing that is, a skill or usually a behavior that is, in such deficit and such negatively impactful that it has to be addressed, right? They might do a lot of things right. In a lot of situations, and I have to say this, if I had to summarize the kind of conversations that I've helped coach in this regard, is mostly they're very chronic, bad behavior from people that are brilliant and clinically astute. And that's why these conversations sometimes don't get had, right? Because that trap of they're clinically astute. How dare I go after their behavior, right? When they're clinically astute. Or how am I going to replace them if they quit? Or, something like that. And that's a common trap, okay? But in this conversation, there's nothing positive. Even though there is many things positive about this person, this is not the conversation to talk about those things. It's likely the reason that those things were talked about in the past to them in maybe a sandwich conversation of, this is a problem, but you're great at this. This is a problem and I need you to correct it, but you're great at this. They didn't hear the seriousness of your message of this is a problem and it has to change, because what they heard was you're great at this, right? So this is that conversation that is not a sandwich approach. There is no positivity, and the delivery is very serious, very firm, and you are complete control. So let's go over those 5 points that are in this very serious, nothing positive conversation. So the first point you need to make in this conversation is to describe what the problem is. What is the behavior or the skill or the knowledge deficit that is at issue here that needs to be corrected? So if you have any data, if you have any evidence that you can show, that's fabulous, right? To just kind of create this clear picture. But a lot of times when it involves behavior, you need to describe it, right? I witnessed this, I heard this. And then sometimes you're going to have to say, well, I didn't even hear it myself. I didn't see it myself. A patient reported it to me. A family reported it to me. A coworker reported it to me, whatever. But when it's chronic and persistent, it isn't one person usually that has told you this. It's many. So a phrase I like to use is, I've heard it enough to believe that it's true, and this is what I believe to be true. And then you describe the behavior, the performance level that you believe to be true that's at issue here. So if you do this part very, very well, then the employee is going to be watching a video or a picture that describes themselves in ways that they've maybe never looked at themselves. And you want to paint that picture for them so they clearly understand and they see what you're seeing. Okay, so if you can use data, if it's chronic tardiness or absenteeism that's not been corrected through positive coaching or other ways, show them the attendance record. Don't just say, don't use generic stuff here, guys, like you have a poor attitude or you're not nice to your coworkers. You cannot go generic here, guys. You need examples. You need data. If it's a registration clerk and they're supposed to scan 100% of the insurance cards on every patient they register, and you have a report that says this person only does it 80% of the time, you bring that with you, okay? So if you have data, bring it. If it's a documentation or error issue and you can show it in the record or any record of it, that's fabulous. But usually it's using your words to describe it and paint the picture. So you need to be as specific as possible. And they're going to probably want to jump in, especially if it's behavior, and said, who told you that, right? Especially if you didn't see it yourself. And that's when you need to say to them, I'm not answering questions today. I need you to listen. We'll talk about that next week, okay? And I will tell you that I've never known that next week conversation for them to ask that same question, where you might have to reveal your source. And in mature cultures, the sources will say, tell them it was me. But most cultures aren't there yet. But I love it when a culture is there. So number 2 point is to state the impact of that behavior. So what you want to do here is make sure that they see the connection between what they're doing, how they're behaving, and what negative impact is the consequence from it. So using that example of the registration clerk, that 80% of the time she's capturing the insurance, but 20% of the time she's not, she may have no idea what the ripple effect and the impact is down the pipe of the process and the workflow of how that might impact patients, how that might impact, the billers in their department, how it might impact the financial situation of her organization. She may have no idea of that impact. So here's where we bring in the impact. That employee that is tardy for work every day may not know the impact or have thought of the impact on the coworkers that had to stay late and missed, a child's event because they had to stay and cover for them, or that report for everyone started late, or that a certain patient was delayed in care, etc. So you need to state the impact, right? And you need to paint the picture of the impact just like you paint the picture of the problem. And this is key. I would say that this is one of those things that when this is delivered in a conversation and then we debrief after these real conversations, that the leader delivering this conversation says this is when their eyes and their attention really just got fixed, right? Because they hadn't really maybe thought of that before. And you think these are smart people. Can you believe that they don't know the impact of these behaviors or, these performance issues? But, this is where if we do this part right, we can really open some eyes to the potential for change. So then the third point of this conversation is, I think, where we get really fair in delivering a very harsh message. A very hard one to deliver. I think this part alone makes it very, very fair to the receiver of this message, because point 3 is where we state what we expect, where we talk about the standard that is not being met, and we get very clear on what they need to do to meet the standard. Okay, so we need to be, again, not generic. We can't say be on time for work, right? So what does be on time for work mean? Well, in a physician office practice, when they had this problem with a nurse practitioner that was tardy for work for her first patient of the day every day for 18 months for an average of 20 minutes, which meant every patient every day was waiting and late, and then the care was rushed and more errors occurred. And you just know overtime at the end of the day, callbacks don't get done, prescriptions don't, what happens, right? The impact. But what gets very fair here in the conversation like that is when you say being on time for work means your first patient is scheduled to be roomed at 8 a.m. And being on time means your hand is on the door of the first patient's room at 8 a.m. Now the employee knows what to do to succeed, right? You have made it so clear that if they say, I'm going to change, they know exactly what they need to do. And that expectation is not fuzzy, it is not gray, they know what to do. So we need to state what we expect. When it comes to behavior, that's why we love written behavior standards in organizations. So if we have written standards in organizations about how we behave, then we can pull out those standards. And if it's under that section of commitment to coworkers, and there's some things there related to chronic, persistent, bad behaviors with coworkers, such as bullying or things like that, then what we can do is we can pull out those standards and say, this is what we expect. And it's not just expected of you, it's expected of everybody. And here it is in writing, this is what we expect. And formula I like for this part is stop, start, or continue. You've probably heard that before and used it in other ways, but this idea of start, what are they not doing that they need to start doing? So set that expectation. You're not doing this and you need to start. Or maybe they're doing something, behaving in a negative way, and you can describe that, and they need to stop doing that. So you need to describe that very specifically. And then also this idea of not continue, but modify. So maybe they're doing it one way and they need to change and do it another way. So if you can be very descriptive about what they need to do, and again, you want to put that in writing in the plan as this is what we expect. If you are going to succeed in this organization, in this position, and remain on our team, you need to perform and at this level, right? So, and you need to be clear, and this is where it gets fair. If you are fuzzy here, you are setting them up to fail, and that is not fair. You need to be as clear as possible. I like to use example. I have 5 children, and let's say one of them, their room is always messy. No, that would never happen. But let's say one of them, their room is always messy. And maybe I say to my daughter, you can go spend the night at your friend's house tonight if you clean your room. Well, she says, Mom, my room is clean. I'm going to my friend's house. And I walk into her room and I don't see clean, right? I see her definition of clean, but not mine. And now we're in this situation where neither of us wins, right? It's a no-win situation. In her definition, her room is clean, and in my definition, it is not. You do not want to be in that situation in an employment situation, right? When somebody's employment is on the line, you don't want fuzziness about what definition is clean. You want to be very clear. What I mean by clean is all of your dirty laundry is down in the basement, in the laundry hamper next to the laundry machine, and the first load is put in the washing machine. Or it means that all of your countertop or all of your dresser tops are totally cleaned off. There's nothing on top and they've been dusted. Or it means all of your clean clothes that are laying all over the place are hung up on hangers and put away in drawers and they're all shut and tidy, whatever. So if I want to set her up to win and succeed and us not have that tangle about, what I meant by a clean room, I need to be very clear. So we need to be very, very clear, just like hand on the door of the first patient at 8 a.m. That is so clear to know exactly what the employee needs to do to succeed. So number 4 is to state how we're going to monitor. Now, in the situation of that person that's scanning, insurance cards, there's obviously a way to monitor that. So keep monitoring it, but then what you want to do is say, every week I'm going to sit down and go over your monitoring rates with you and understand what's getting in your way of getting 100%, right? And I'm going to give you that feedback. So also, how are you going to monitor that nurse practitioner has her hand on the door of the first patient every day at 8 a.m.? Somebody's going to have to monitor that, and it might be their nurse, right? And so in environments, it gets a little tricky to do the monitoring. In that situation of the nurse practitioner, they might have to punch a time clock where others don't. None of the other practitioners do. And, they punch the time clock. So, we have to set up a system for monitoring. When it's toxic behavior in a department, it may be a monitoring system that, I'm randomly going to select 3 of your peers that you worked with, or handed off to in the last week, every week. And I'm going to ask them 3 questions about these 3 specific things about your behavior at work, right? And so this is where HR really needs to help you, because, I've been in situations of union environments and others where, this was challenged of how are you going to monitor this person differently than other employees. Well, you know what? What's really amazing about this is employees that want to succeed, after having one of these conversations with their leader, they are usually very open to the monitoring. And that's a sign that they're going to succeed, is they don't fight against the monitoring. That, in fact, they say, bring it on, because that's going to help me. So, but in the beginning, be prepared to figure out how to monitor this. And then number 5, that last point of the conversation is consequences. So describing the consequences if the behavior or the performance doesn't change. Well, behavior change is hard, guys. And it can take 6 months or more for behavior to change dramatically and consistently to your standard, especially if it's been chronically or persistently low, okay? So it can take time. So it doesn't mean that they're going to be perfect overnight, that you've just sprinkled, pixie dust on them. But what it means is you should see progressive, better, improved behavior and describe what the consequences are if that doesn't happen. So usually it's the steps in your disciplinary process. So you want to kind of look at that, and that's part of that preparation, is to describe what is it. Are they already on a step in the discipline process, or are we just starting that from ground one? So absent consequences, we're merely offering a suggestion, and this is not the time for suggestions. I mean, we're at a point, if you're sitting down having this conversation, we're not suggesting that it changes, we're requiring that it changes. And so if you do this conversation very, very well, you prepared well, you've delivered well, the response you want from this employee is, I need to change, or I'm no longer going to be allowed to work here. That's the response that you want. That they realize that this is I've got to move up, or I've got to move on. And some people in response will deselect, I call it. I had a situation one time, it was with a chef, not a chef, but a night cook at a hospital. And during this conversation, she just threw down, I hate to cook. At the end of the conversation, she goes, I absolutely hate to cook. And, my response was, is there anything that could happen that would change that, right? Like that would make you fall in love with cooking? Because obviously the performance, the output of your cooking is not meeting the standards of our patients and our employees that are eating the cooking. And so she said, no, I hate to cook. I don't even cook for my family. And so the conversation ended. She self-deselected, and I helped her write her resignation letter, right? And so, in these situations, not all the time is the employee going to decide to move up. But you did the right thing if you put them in a situation to ask that big question of themselves. Do I want to change? Am I willing to give it a try to change? Am I willing to commit to it? And I tell you, if they're willing to commit to it, you'll usually know it within a week. That next follow-up conversation, or even before, they will tell you, thank you. Thank you. I needed that wake-up call. I do want to change. I do want to fix this. It's not even just affecting my work, it's affecting my home, right? So that's what happens in these situations. If you do them well, you're actually, as hard as it might seem, and it's maybe as cruel and unfair and unkind as it might seem, it might be the kindest thing you've ever done for a fellow human being, is to have this wake-up call conversation with them. Because most of the time what I find is these situations that are troubling them at work, causing these issues at work, are also troubling them and causing them issues at home. And now you're helping them right? You may need to connect them to EAP. You may need to connect them to resources, etc. But until you have this conversation, you're probably not going to know what help and what resources they need. So in follow-up, there's follow-up to this. You want to have regular follow-up. Oftentimes at the first, it could be daily for a while, and then weekly, and then monthly. And even when you start and prepare for this conversation, you have to even think to yourself, is it worth investing the time and energy in this person? And like I said, oftentimes it's one of those situations where there's chronic, persistent bad behavior that's been tolerated and accepted, allowed to continue. They're great clinicians. And you know what? I've seen several of them go from this situation to being even major contributors in their department, in the entire organization. One I can think of even became a really contributing member to a patient experience team. And his real issue when this conversation happened was he was rude to patients and mean and actually even sometimes harmful to patients. And now he is, a contributor to improving the entire patient experience by being on an employee-driven team that does just that. So I see that this can work. And I know so many stories. I love to tell the story of Rachel, a 68-year-old CRNA who had been a bully since childhood. And this conversation from her boss at age 68 changed her life, changed her career, and she is so thankful for that. So it's tough, guys. 5-point conversations, getting to this point, being prepared, mustering the will, mastering the skill. It is tough, but you can do it, and it works. This skill works. So there it is, guys, 5-point conversation. If you need a little bit more resource on this, you can watch this video again 50 times if you have to. We do have a chapter, Direct Dialogue, in our book that contains information on this conversation. So the employee experience, second chapter is Direct Dialogue, and the 5-point conversation is there. Also, on our website, capstoneleadership.net, we have information there about our e-learning platform, Capstone EDU, and it's there that we have a whole direct dialogue course where we teach about powerful feedback, compliment, positive coaching, and correction. And there's actually 2 levels, probably about 10 different missions that help you prepare for a 5-point conversation. So there's more resources in our Capstone EDU course called Direct Dialogue. So if you're confused about what resources we might have that might help you, just go to our website, capstoneleadership.net. There's a place there where you could reach out for a call with us, or there's a place where you can just even submit a question and ask something. Or my email is Sue, S-U-E, at capstoneleadership.net. So Sue at capstoneleadership.net. So you could reach out to me and I could connect you to resources. So thanks for your time and attention today. And for those of you that are new to Fans of the Framework, all of these videos are recorded and stored. If you look in Facebook there's a whole, there's probably 50 videos now on various topics about creating an award-winning top-ranking organization and improving your leadership and your employee-driven efforts to do that. So go on in there if you've just joined us and you've missed a lot of those. And so we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.